Welcome, everybody. My name is Elissa Foster. I'm a professor joining you from DePaul University in Chicago, although my accent would suggest I'm coming from somewhere a lot warmer. I'm originally from Australia, and Katrin of this wonderful collection, edited collection that we'll be talking about today. She's also from Curtin University in West Australia. As you can see, I hope at the top of your screen, Reinekke Lengelle, or Lengelle? How do you pronounce your name? Lengelle?
Lengelle, yeah, just Lengelle.
Yeah, Lengelle.
Reinekke Lengelle, thank you.
Is really going to be the sort of focus and guide for this session on writing for well-being, theory, research, and practice. Because Katrin den Elzen, the co-editor of this book, couldn't be with us today, Reinekke has got a video recording for us. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit first, Reinekke, and then go into the video?
Yeah, that sounds great. And actually, what I'd like to start with is that everyone just take a moment to settle into your chair or wherever you are, or even if you're at a standing desk, whatever, just to move your body into a position where you feel relaxed, consciously relaxed. You know, we've been sitting a lot today already. So just move your body. You might have been sort of ignoring how you're feeling. So just see, you can just get into a good position and cross your legs or uncross your legs, or, you know, just take a moment. Before I introduce myself briefly and go to the video so you can meet Katrin, who's greeting us on a recorded session, I just want each of you to write down a question about well-being that is pertinent to your life, that feels alive for you at the moment. So if you were able to get an answer to a pertinent question, something that really matters to you, that's current in your life, what would that question be? You know, and it might be a light one, like, how can I really exercise more? Or maybe it's a heavier one, like, how can I really move through this tremendous grief I have currently? So let the question emerge for you and just write it down. Okay. All right, so we'll be working with that question later in the session, more near the end of the session. And don't worry about this question. Don't worry about trying to answer it or anything like that. Just, it is just there present, and that's all. And you don't have to consciously hold it. We'll work with it later and it'll evolve. So my name is Reinekke Lengelle. Reinekke rhymes with Heineken. So if you ever see it spelled, you just know it's a Dutch beer. I'm a Dutch girl originally, born in the Netherlands. I live in Canada, I live in Edmonton, Alberta, where we immigrated as a family when I was 5 years old. And one of my first writing teachers said, one of the reasons that we begin writing is because we were exiled in a particular way. You know, and I think immigration is definitely a kind of exile, and so is having divorced parents very young. My father ended up staying in the Netherlands. So I needed to have a way to story and restory my life as I went along. So quite early on, that need was there. So I did a lot of writing in that area. So really, how I got into writing for well-being, and this is the book we're going to be talking about today that I edited with Katrin den Elzen. And here is a piece of artwork from my oldest daughter, who's studying art in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. So here's the book. And how did I get into it? Really, like I said, I devised a way to help heal myself. I'm kind of like Linus Pauling when he experimented with vitamin C, and he took copious amounts to see what it would do for him. And so I've used writing for well-being sort of as a way to take care of myself throughout life. So really, that's how it began. You know, even when I was 25, I was dumped and heartbroken, and I wrote this little book, Bath Oil for Heartbreak, which I illustrated. You know, so I've gone through life always doing that for myself. So that's the initial thing. And then later, when I was developing my career, I did PhD research in career writing, using the narrative to develop for careers. Then I lost my spouse, who was also my research partner, 5 years ago. He passed away, and I wrote a book, Writing the Self in Bereavement. So each time I've taken writing and used it as a way to help myself, really. And I know that it is also used in so many different contexts like hospice work, palliative care, like I say, hospice and palliative care at prisons. You know, it's been an inspiration for, we know many, an exiled writer who has been jailed for a time and then wrote a life story and was often even a writer to begin with, and then later, you know, became a leader in countries. So writing is so powerful. So Routledge approached me a couple of years ago after I'd written my Writing the Self and Bereavement book, and they asked if I would do a book, something to do with literature. The literature editor approached me, and I thought, well, that won't do, because I'm not a literature person, and I'd be very unskilled and not the right person for the job. But I said, well, not that topic, but writing the self is definitely a topic that I can speak to. And I said, and I have an idea even about who my co-editor could be on this project. And right away, we got an enthusiastic reply from Routledge. So that we began, and we put out a call for chapters, but we also invited individual authors to come forward to write for us. And most of them were able to do that. Some were not because of other commitments. But so we ended up with a curated number of chapters within a word count of 100,000 words. We couldn't go above, so we had to be really strict on each chapter length, etc. So we began working together, and Katrin actually and I had never met in person, but we'd had some commonalities, and she'll speak to that in her video. And it's just been a collaboration made in heaven. You know, I appreciate her so much, and just the alignment has been fantastic. And that's one thing I wanted to mention here too, because I think in any work we do, you know, the heart is such an important part of making that a wonderful life experience. You know, I know as academics, we tend to be quite focused on publishing and advancement, and sometimes the cost is that the heart gets left behind. And this definitely was a project that kept both those things going really well. So I'm an associate professor at Athabasca University, and I wanted to say I've been tenured for several years now, but I started as a visiting graduate professor. I always joke I was visiting for 17 years, a very long visit. So I want to say that because I really also feel aligned with my non-tenured colleagues and want to acknowledge how hard you work in very uncertain circumstances. Something that writing actually also helped me navigate my career in those very uncertain times. And even when you're tenured, after, you know, just the way that the academy is now, there isn't a fundamental complete sense of security within that. And the security is not to be found in those external places, but it's to be found in the internal places. And that's what this Writing for Wellbeing really is about. So I'd like to now, if there aren't any pressing questions right now, I would like to go to the video with Katrin greeting us from Perth, Australia. Okay, I'll keep track of the chat if questions emerge. Let me see. Let me see if I can find it readily. Okay. I'm just going to see if this is the correct link. Okay. Okay, here she is. Can you see Katrin coming on screen? Excellent. Okay.
Hi, Katrin. Hi, Reinekke. And hello to the participants of the 2024 ISAN conference. And thank you very much to Keith Berry for inviting us to introduce our Writing for Wellbeing book to you. We are very excited to be able to do that. I thought I might start off with introducing myself. So my background is I have a PhD Master's in Creative Writing. And as part of that, I wrote a grief memoir entitled Locked In, Daring to Break Free, about the extreme illness of my husband and the experience of young widowhood. I work as a grief counselor. My passion is being a Writing for Wellbeing researcher and facilitator. I am widely published academically on bereavement, grief memoir, post-traumatic growth, and Writing for Wellbeing. I was also a special editor for the British Journal of Guidance and Counselling for the special issue on living with loss, together with Reinekke and Robert Niemeyer. And I also teach graduate counselling students in Writing for Wellbeing at university. And the reason why we're doing this recording is because, unfortunately, I live in a very different time zone to the conference. And so it's too late for me to be able to be here live. And thanks to modern technology, this is a wonderful opportunity to join in. And as you can see, Reinekke has got night and she's wearing a winter jumper. And I'm in summer and it's daytime for me. And that leads me into maybe saying a little bit about Reinekke's and my collaboration, because we were in such different time zones and different continents. However, interestingly enough, that really didn't matter. So the fact that we weren't together in person didn't matter. If anything, it added possibly a richness and depth to the project, because we have, you know, different locations. So that's why we have, you know, a range of Canadian, American, Australian, and British collaborators. And but the you know, the physical distance is only one factor, because the personal distance or closeness is different. And I think that the fact that our collaboration was so closely aligned, we shared the passion and the goals for this book. And so it made it a smooth process. Still, of course, a lot of work went into it over a 2.5-year period, but we were so closely aligned. And I don't believe that this book would be, we wouldn't have the end product that we have if it wasn't for this incredibly aligned and heartfelt collaboration. Yeah, absolutely. So I might say something briefly, because I don't want to take up too much time of the live session, about what I see as as editor, as the most sort of prominent feature of the Writing for Wellbeing book, and that is that it's really filling a gap in the literature about the breadth of the applicability of Writing for Wellbeing. So in our book, we really aimed to look at many different applications. And the book itself, we've got different sections, and the sections reflect that. So for example, we start off with voicing the self, and this is Reinekke and I making a start through our shared experience of widowhood, although this was in a slightly different stage of our life, and we used different writing styles, but that gave us a lot of insights about how to achieve post-traumatic growth, which we both did. And then we looked at how it is used for the self-development, how we can help as practitioners others to voice their self, we're also looking at the use of personal narratives, personal trauma narratives in higher education, both from the perspective of practitioners, of lecturers, as well as students. We've got research that I conducted, a Writing-for-wellbeing study with 20 participants. 10 people were a bereaved group and 10 people were experienced grief and a whole range of other losses. And then we're moving on in the book to writing as resistance. And we have a chapter on a refugee in offshore detention who wrote a memoir smuggled out on WhatsApp, and a blog by a Black professor. And then lastly, we're closing off by looking at the other side, and that is the audience. So the relationship, this is not very well researched, between the author and the reader, and how the reader may perceive the writing very different from the author intention, and what that might evoke in us as authors. And I would like to share a bit about how I came to Writing-for-wellbeing. So when I did my master's, I delved deeply into expressive writing and Pennebaker, and absolutely amazed with the groundbreaking research that they did. But the more I got into writing my own memoir, I felt that expressive writing, as rich and as deep and as broad as it is, it had covered every possible angle of research there is. And I felt very strongly if writing over, for 15, 20 minutes with exactly the same instructions can bring about so many healing benefits for about a 6-week period, how much more transformation and can we have if we look at different styles of writing, if we have different prompts, and if it is over a longer period of time, such as a memoir. So with my own memoir, I can say that the writing process, because I talked about traumatic grief and the very, very traumatic illness of my husband, I can honestly say that it was very instrumental in me working through and processing and integrating the trauma. And this brings me to a point that, Writing-for-wellbeing captures that a writing doesn't have to be on this dichotomy of it's either for craft or it's for the purpose of, healing. A grief memoir, and autoethnographic writing, poetry, it can be both personal growth and a work of craft. So, for example, there were some in academia who said, oh, if you're writing a grief memoir as part of your PhD, you've got to be healed. You can't write a literary piece if you haven't been healed. And I felt this to be very jarring. And this is not the case. It doesn't have to be either or.
Yes, and in fact, I think the autoethnographers listening here will really hear that and know that from experience, that a lot of the autoethnography they write is healing for them and transformational for them, and that you heal in the process of writing. And of course, we have a theoretical work too that we describe in the book that describes what kind of journey that actually is and describes that process.
Yeah.
And, so I think that indeed we generally are a group that challenges assumptions made in academia about work and research, and how we can bring our personal work into it in very relevant and theoretically founded ways. And I think that this, your experience, of course, speaks to that, and the book speaks to that.
Yes, the book speaks to that because one of the characteristics of this Writing for Wellbeing book is that every single chapter is academically rigorous, but at the same time, every contributor is also sharing some personal experience of writing. And I think it is this combination that allows the personal in academia is adding an extra level of richness to this book.
Yes, and it's been a great pleasure. I also want to say thank you to you for the work that we've done together. It's been amazing. I didn't know Katrin before in person, before we started on the collaboration, but I had brief contact with her, and I was so impressed with her writing that I knew that when we were talking to Routledge, I thought, I know who I want to be my co-editor, and absolutely it was the right intuition. And so I thank you for the contribution, and it's just been wonderful. And we met in person after almost 2 years of working together.
Yes.
Yeah. The in-person meeting was as good as we hoped it would be and thought it would be, and you know, the alignment was there also in person. It was not just a factor of our remote work together. So yeah, it's been very, very meaningful.
We developed a friendship very quickly, as well as the academic connection.
Yeah, exactly. And and we shared some of the very similar life experiences, but really it was that combination of telling our story, having experience with grief, but also having the academic interest and the narrative interest to put all those things together. So there were so many things that brought us together. So it was meant to be. And the beautiful book was born out of the collaboration. And of course, we'll be speaking further about it at the conference. But I wanted Katrin to have an opportunity to meet everybody here that's at the presentation to talk about the book, since again, we're not in the compatible time zones to do so.
Yes, so thank you very, very much for that opportunity, and please enjoy the rest of the session, the live session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for organizing that and making Katrin present for us, even though she can't be on the Zoom call, Reinekke. If it's okay with you, I might dive into a couple of questions. Since Katrin actually brought up a statement about one of the themes of the book being that writing doesn't have to be either for personal growth or for craft. I guess I'd like to start by saying if there were any other themes that emerged from your experience of co-editing the collection that surprised you, or that you were delighted by, or sort of came through across these various contributors that you could speak to.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I think that I remember reading some of the chapters and many of the chapters and just feeling so moved by the stories, but also one of the things that emerged as you speak is about the sense of embodiment and how important it is that we feel through our stories, because I talk about going from a first story, which is often a stuck or suffering or victim story, blame story, to a second story. But that second story never has real resonance unless it's embodied, unless it has, our emotions have gone along with us through the journey, so that when we say, I'm healed, or I have a different perspective now, that it's actually felt in the body. And one of the authors, Stephanie Dale, speaks to that. She works with people in the Australian outback and really emphasizes also this sense of the body being a part and present to it. So that's one of the things that I think has come more into view for me as we work through the chapters. And the other thing is just the other thing I was delighted by, I have to say too, is that some of our freshly graduated master's students who wrote for the book were actually some of the strongest writers coming in, which was such a delight to see, so we had, yeah, just so rigorous and so skilled, and so that was a delight as well. So
That's lovely. I was just going to say, I think we have the chat open, and which is, I'm going to try and monitor that. You can too if you want to, Reinekke, but you're the star of the show, so I'll I'll try and do the work of balancing these two. So I will pull in the chat question, which is talking about writing in a personal journal and feeling stuck. This is from Joanne Taylor, and then realizing that that journaling in and of itself doesn't necessarily help to move to what you're calling the second story. And I'm going to ask a question related to that, because I love this idea of staying in the feeling of embodiment as a way to make that second story a healing story and a felt story and almost an authentic story rather than an intellectualized story. I sometimes get I sometimes fear that when we step back and reflect on some of those raw stories, and then for autoethnography, connecting it to cultural patterns or connecting it to social structures or social critique, that we kind of intellectualize. So if you could talk a little bit from your experience of like ways to make sure that we retain that sense of embodiment while still allowing for that growth to happen, would be great.
okay, yeah, thank you for that question. Really appreciate it. Joanne, in the chat, I see your question, and I call it the cycle of lament. The cycle of lament. We stay in the old story sometimes and reaffirm it because it holds up some parts of our identity that feel comforting in some particular way. One of the things that James Pennebaker has said in his expressive writing research is there's a couple of pitfalls to writing, and that's one, over-intellectualizing, or a substitute for action, or indeed, this sort of this ongoing intellectualizing that we do, as opposed to lifting ourselves out of the old narrative. I wanted to say something about trauma. Elissa and I exchanged a little bit before the session about trauma, and I think this ties in. And I want to say something about it because I think that of course trauma is in the body, but I want to say something about trauma. So I'm going to park the embodiment piece just for a moment and speak to trauma. And so I want to say something paradoxical about trauma and writing for well-being. And that is, on the one hand, writing legitimizes our pain. It allows us to say, I love you, this to the self, right? To the self, I love you, I hear you, this happened to you, you are seen in what has happened. And that's a wonderful thing. It's compassion, it's called compassion. And we need that holding space. It is the beautiful thing, the acknowledgement, the same thing as what a good friend would offer. Okay, but a good friend doesn't allow for our continued victimhood, right? So the first story is a beautiful place to allow self-compassion, but we don't want to stay in the first story, right? So when you think of writing in a journal and getting stuck, we need tools that also deconstruct narrative, not only build up a narrative like this happened to me. In my case, for instance, I'm a child of divorced parents. I'm an immigrant. Therefore, I was exiled. I came to Canada. I didn't speak English. I had to learn it. That has been really difficult in my life. Okay, that's part of my story. But re-narration and the development of a second story requires questioning the narrative as well, because parts of our trauma may not actually be true. We may have embellished it to incite some necessary sympathy and understanding from others, for ourselves. We may have made assumptions about others' views of us that are not even true. We never checked it out. We thought we were judged by someone, but maybe we weren't. Like, my dad was never proud of me, someone says. But actually, if we examine, we can easily find examples during the lifetime that he was proud and he showed it in his own particular way, right? So, so we need to reconstruct, deconstruct our stories as well, so we don't stay in that first story victim entitlement rescue blame place. You know, and that's the model we describe in the chapter, in the first chapter of this introduction book, that the first story is characterized by victimhood, entitlement, rescue, and blame. All the four things that disempower us, actually. So are we also willing to give up our story of trauma? And I think that this is a really important conversation in academia, because in a way we live in a time that trauma is finally recognized, but now we have the danger of victimhood being put on a pedestal. And that is going to be damaging for us ourselves in our own narrative writing. So we may have become too identified with a story that needed a hearing, but has become harmful. Right? So in my view, writing for well-being is both narrating and unnarrating, unlearning and re-narrating. We must ask ourselves in the end, what if trauma is not us? It has taken up residence in our bones and our muscles and in our nervous system as a form of conditioning, but we are not that. So, yeah.
I want to make sure that, you know, I offer a clear invitation to folks to respond in the chat to what you're hearing, because I'm sure some of these wonderful statements that Reinekke is sharing will help, you know, some things bubble up for you. So since we're kind of talking then about that, moving through to the story, it might feel like a bit of a jump. I'm trying to build a bridge. So when you are crafting the story and your story implicates other people, and I think this may have been a theme as I came in at the end of the previous panel, there's some difficulty, I think, with how the care and that you give to others in the story, but that becomes very complicated if those other people are not around to, or it's not even that. Let me, it's a very specific question that you and Katrin talk about with the place that these others hold in your story, and this tension of wanting to preserve that place once those folks are deceased, and sometimes needing to move through that. And the reason that I ask this is that I felt that tension as someone who's written about family life. You know, for example, my partner, and realizing that there's a kind of stuckness that can happen where the person becomes a character and is out on the page and doesn't necessarily have their own voice in that moment, or might change later on, and so forth. And there's no way that, I think when somebody's deceased, there's no way to dialogue about that anymore.
Sure.
Do you know, I'm talking around it because I feel like it sparked a lot of things for me when I was reading that. It's one thing to be writing your identity, but you're also writing somebody else's in a way too.
Yeah, are you referring to the chapter Katrin and I wrote about our deceased spouses, the first chapter after the introductory chapter in this book?
Yes.
Yeah. I know this topic comes up very regularly, you know, in the autoethnographic, the whole dialogue, and I think what we're finding in other sessions too is the answer is never straightforward. It's always a reflection, you know, it remains a reflection. I think in this chapter, you'll see that, you know, we've written with the utmost respect for of course our deceased spouses. I had unfinished business with my spouse, which I write about. I also wrote about that very comprehensively in the Writing the Self for in Bereavement book. I had to do a lot of soul searching Because, you know, speaking of writing for well-being, we don't want to damage anyone we love, because that's actually self-damaging too. So it really means an ownership of the story. And so that's the way that there was two things that guided me when I wrote intensively about this. One was I wrote from, this is my experience of that person. And I also shared the work with a note, like my editor was actually, my content editor was Carolyn Ellis. So we discussed a lot about what I was revealing, and she encouraged me to reveal some more. And then because I revealed some more of the unfinished business, I had to really look at how I'm presenting that, because it did implicate some other family members as well. And the last thing I want to say is I had a rule about it, because Franz, who passed, he was my second spouse, and he had children, grown daughters of his own. I did not write about anything that would make the children feel like they were on display in some way. I was so careful with that, because I felt, I just said they did a wonderful funeral, and they did, and any of their emotional expressions during his illness and death, and after his death, were not for me to tell, because I felt, you know, they had not chosen me. I was his second partner. They had received me in their lives as the new partner, but they certainly hadn't asked for it. And so that was important for me. And I feel like I can, after this book came out, I suppose I lost maybe a night or two of sleep over it, but in the end, I can be proud of it 10 years on. You know, I think I will reread it 10 years on and go, I wasn't being a jerk in any way. I didn't do the indirect passive aggressive sort of comment here or there. You know, I really cleaned up anything that maybe have hinted of that. And I had colleagues who also read and reread, and I asked, is this respectful? Is this respectful? Please tell me if you think it isn't.
Yeah. Just quickly, because I know that there's a question for you. You know, my husband is also an academic, and he went through a cancer journey about 6 years ago, and is now a 5-year survivor, which is wonderful. But I have not written about what that was like for me. He has written about what it's like for him, but it's almost like his story exists, and I'm completely absent from it. And I have sort of told myself I cannot write about it at all, because it's his story. So it was very interesting to me to kind of see how you navigated that. And I think there might be a way, you know, if you know, at some point to not just not do it. Like I just can't do it. You know what I mean? But to say, how can I do it? Why might I do it? What might be, what kind of writing might be needed? And maybe it just starts with the first story, and then I see if I need a second story after that.
Yeah, and maybe before we go to the question in the chat, there were 70 pages of this book that never got into the book. You know, 70 pages is just deleted, put into another separate file. So I think that's important to note, that we do have to write sometimes pieces, the unsent letter, as it were. You know, that doesn't enter into the book. So
yeah.
But I have a whole chapter in this book. I have a whole chapter on sharing the work and ethics around that. But this book in the first chapter explains, or in the first chapter that Katrin and I wrote, just tells our story about post-traumatic growth, and it really stays within our own growth that we had. So I think there are no real strong, I think, contentious issues in this book as compared to this one. It was.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's just it's a touch point in that chapter that obviously resonated with me. And so I am happy to let the floor go over to for other folks who have questions. Rashida had a question.
I welcome questions, yeah.
But I can't see Rashida now.
Rashida, are you here? I have a question about trauma.
We might have lost Rashida.
Okay.
So the terms unnarrating and re-narrating, as they emphasize the movability of our stories. Brian made that observation there. And so does anybody else have questions about the collection? I have more questions, but if anybody else has questions about the collection as a whole or specific chapters within it. Could you maybe talk a little bit just so that people get a sense of this diversity that you're talking about? I think Katrin covered a little bit, but there were, Sylvia, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah. Hi, Reinekke. When I saw the presentation of the book, I was very interested, and I thought it was going to be somehow different in this way. I thought you were going to suggest to write for healing as with therapeutic, as a therapeutic aid. And for what I hear, it's just that you write your own story and you find how much writing your story helps you heal, right? But it's not necessarily framed within the therapeutic idea.
No, the book is about writing for well-being in the sense that it's also a textbook that'll be in a Writing the Self course. It is a therapeutic writing book as well as a book speaking about all the different contexts of writing. So let me just give a little bit of an indication for the content, so maybe that becomes clearer. So the first chapter was about Katrin and my journey through grief and how we used writing to heal through that to achieve some post-traumatic growth. The second chapter is called Poetry and Connection, and how poetry, it's by myself, John Sayers, and Jerry Giebel-Chavis, who's very well known in the poetry therapy community in the United States. And so it's all using poetry for healing, and it talks about how that might be viewed and how that might be done. So another chapter called The Right Road to Self-Discovery, Recovery, and Growth by Stephanie Dale. She works with people in the outback in Australia to write down their stories. Like, for an example, a woman who's gone through extreme loss and grief and wasn't able to, she wanted to build a wishing well and wasn't able to. And then when she came to the writing workshop, wrote what grief had sort of locked itself in place and frozen her. And after she was able to write that story, she was able to build her wishing well, you know. And it's also linked to the stress of the extreme drought that they have in Australia, and writing through some of the environmental grief and pain that people have as well. So the book really does cover many contexts. I'll just read briefly to summarize. There's a chapter on working with graduate students and their personal stories, and how we can do that ethically and carefully, because graduate students will come to us with their stories. We really need to be ethical about how we guide them, you know. Another one is by a graduate student of mine who took 3 writing courses in our master's program, one on fiction writing, one on creative nonfiction, and one Writing the Self with me, and combined the 3 courses to write a healing story using creative and fictional and nonfiction writing, you know, and she has a wonderful way of describing that.
So could I ask you just quickly, Reinekke, so I also wanted to highlight one that's close to my heart, because I'm in health and clinical communication, is the chapter on helping physicians in training to navigate through the trauma that they experience as they go through their professional training, specifically, which I think is amazing. So I guess just to paraphrase your question, maybe, Sylvia, is do these crafted stories that you know, they go through a process, there are readings, there's looking at metaphor, like you're combining the raw story with the creative process to create these poems and stories. Do they end up in print? Do they finish do they sort of have a finished life that just lives with the author and the group? because I think that I can imagine that there are contexts where a therapist, you might work with a therapist and share creative writing in the therapy or psychiatric or psychological kind of relationship or counseling relationship. And then there's what this is doing. Does that make sense?
That was kind of my question.
Yeah.
Whether it is as an aid for people to overcome whatever they have to deal with, or it's something to publish like we do in autoethnography, like more academic writing.
Yeah, so this book itself will serve as a textbook for people who are interested in the field of writing for well-being. It's not a workbook in the sense it doesn't give suggestions on what to do. It's not a practical book that way. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, and maybe, I mean, one of the things that was actually news to me was I didn't realize that there was like an entire kind of disciplinary community writing for well-being, WFW. And my understanding is that it's quite interdisciplinary, but it isn't necessarily driven by, you know, clinical therapeutic authors particularly, or researchers particularly, and teachers. Would that be accurate? It's Reinekke?
Yeah, the greater community, one of the organizations is Lapidus in the United Kingdom, and the other organization, you know, Poetry Therapy in the United States is, or say two of the bigger organizations in the field related to this. It is very interdisciplinary, and it's not only for people that are trained as therapists or counselors to use, but also writing teachers, community workers. So you don't have to be a trained counselor to work with this, with it, you know, work with the method, various writing exercises that's part of this field, you know. So expressive arts, people will use it, grief counselors may use it, but also writing teachers may use it, school teachers may use it. So yeah, and how to do that too, ethically and safely, and where, you know, it also speaks to those boundaries that we need to have to be able to facilitate, you know, facilitate this work in safe and ethical ways, you know.
Well,
like I'm not a trained counselor or psychotherapist myself, but I've been teaching this way of writing for 26 years. You know, over time. I'm a writer and academic and poet, and yeah.
Can I get the names of those two organizations? The ones that you mentioned in the US and in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, NAPT and the National Association for Poetry Therapy. There we go.
I would venture to say that for any of us who teach autoethnography in the classroom setting or outside it, those same concerns about, you know, ethics and boundaries and so forth that have been well established in writing for well-being are applicable to us as well. Although some of the tools we might use, you know, on a surface level, like with you know, social analysis and so forth, might be different. My feeling is that there's a similar dynamic happening there with the introduction of the creative process and review and revision and sharing and so forth that might happen in the, well, as I understand it, happens in these groups as people write. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about using it for healing, and I don't have a therapeutic background either. And I've done it with students and I see how helpful it can be. But I was wondering, I even considered becoming trained to be a therapist, to be able to use writing as healing. And as I hear you, I think it is possible to do a lot without all that training that I would have to do if I wanted to use writing as healing. So that's why I ask you all that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And last year I presented a piece at the Autoethnographic Conference called psychologists don't own healing.
Yeah, neat. Mhm.
So we all own healing.
I'll check on it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I don't know how much time we have left to the hour, but perhaps it's also a good moment to complete the
Oh,
writing exercise that we
yes,
began.
please. For those, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when if you might revisit your question and write it down one more time, it might have evolved. What is the question around well-being that is alive for you at the moment? So just write it down again and see what emerges. Sometimes there's a deepening of the question just by having had it sit there. So you have the question now, and now I want you to think about somebody in the autoethnographic community, or maybe the broader writing community, that has inspired you. Who has inspired you? It might be someone like Anne Lamott, but it could also be Norman Denson, as we heard today. So who you say that it speaks to my heart, somebody who speaks to your heart, who you admire in the work. Just bring that person to mind. You might write down their name or their initials. The last step in this exercise is to have a dialogue with that particular mentor or admired person and your question. So I'll just give you a very brief example. Say the question was, how can I find a better work-life balance for my well-being? And I was thinking of, for instance, Norman Denton, who was remembered today, and I met him very briefly on the one call. So he might say, no matter, even when your health is sometimes compromised, what will give you energy is the things that you love. So continue to do the things that you love. You know, that would be what I think Norman would tell me, you know, in that question. So have a dialogue with that person that you admire on the page, just a couple of lines to get you started. And you can follow this up after the session. So imagine them speaking with you and responding to your question.
I just realized I think I'm supposed to like bring this to a close, but I got so caught up in what I was writing that I forgot I was supposed to do that.
Yeah, so I know we had so little time, but I just wanted to give everyone a taste, like when you put a question out there at the beginning, and then you have, for instance, the dialogical exercise later where you can revisit that, and all of a sudden there's a wisdom that you tap into by making a creative leap, by inviting someone to mind in the imagination. And that was the idea, to show that. I wanted you to have a taste of this work as well. So
that was a gorgeous little appetizer. Thank you so much.